Some decisions don't arrive through thinking, they arrive already formed. You recognize these moments immediately because nothing inside you argues back. There is no tension to resolve, no internal debate waiting to be won. Just a quiet awareness that something has already landed. These decisions don't feel dramatic, they feel complete. They often appear in ordinary moments, while walking, while listening, while pausing between one thought and the next. And when they arrive, the body responds first, or not with excitement, but with ease, a softening, a subtle exhale you didn't know you were holding. The mind usually follows later, trying to catch up. It looks for reasons, it wants language, it wants a narrative it can understand. But what's already been felt doesn't depend on explanation, it doesn't become clearer through analysis. It simply remains steady, unmoving, unchanged by doubt. This is where people get confused. We're taught that decisions are something we make, that clarity is the result of effort, that certainty must be built piece by piece through thought, comparison, and justification. But these moments move in the opposite direction. The clarity comes first, the thinking comes later. And that reversal is unsettling, because when something feels decided before you've consciously decided it, it raises a deeper question about where choice actually begins. You've likely noticed this pattern before, a moment when you already knew what you were going to do long before you could explain why. A moment when delaying the decision felt heavier than making it, not because the choice was difficult, but because it was already resolved somewhere deeper than thought. When you finally acknowledged it, there was relief. As if something inside you had stopped pulling in two directions at once. That relief is important because that internal alignment returning. Before these moments, there is often a subtle friction, a sense of being slightly out of step with yourself. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just a quiet misalignment that shows up as hesitation, fatigue, or the feeling of circling the same question without movement. When the decision lands, that friction disappears. This clarity doesn't come from certainty about the future, it comes from coherence in the present. And coherence has a particular quality to it. It doesn't rush, it doesn't persuade, it doesn't need reinforcement, it simply holds. That's why trying to override these decisions feels unnatural, not wrong, just draining. As if energy leaks the moment you attempt to argue with what has already settled. These are not moments of surrender, they are moments of recognition of a truth that was already in place, waiting for attention rather than permission. And once you begin to notice this pattern, something changes in how you listen to yourself. You stop demanding that every decision justify itself immediately. You stop forcing clarity through effort. You start recognizing when something has already crossed the internal line from possibility into certainty. These moments don't shout. They don't compete for attention. They don't need validation. They simply remain true. This is why, in hindsight, these decisions often feel obvious. You don't look back and marvel at how clever you were. You look back and wonder why you hesitated at all. Understanding that clarity doesn't always announce itself as clarity. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, as the absence of conflict, as the quiet sense that nothing more needs to be added. And once you've experienced that kind of decision, it becomes impossible to confuse it with impulse or pressure. It carries a different weight, a different texture, a sense of finality without force. These are the decisions that don't redirect your day, they redirect your direction, which is why they don't feel optional. And once you begin to recognize them, the question is no longer, what should I choose? But what has already been chosen within me? Because that recognition changes everything. And this is where the deeper understanding begins. Inner knowing does not arrive as information, it arrives as familiarity. It carries the feeling of something already lived rather than something newly discovered. When it appears, there is no sense of surprise, only recognition. You do not feel like you have learned something, you feel like you have remembered it. And this is why inner knowing is often overlooked. It does not behave like insight. It does not arrive with excitement or urgency. It does not demand attention. It settles quietly, as if it has been there the entire time, waiting for the noise to subside long enough to be noticed. There is a particular stillness that accompanies it. Not emptiness, not detachment, but a grounded calm that does not fluctuate. The body senses it immediately. Breathing slows, muscles soften. The nervous system recognizes coherence even when the mind has not yet formed a story around it. Inner knowing does not persuade, it does not convince, it does not explain itself. It simply remains true regardless of whether you act on it or not. This is why it can feel so steady, even when everything around it feels uncertain. It is not reacting to circumstance, it is responding to truth. Many people mistake this for intuition in the way intuition is often described, as a sudden insight or a fleeting hunch. But inner knowing is not fleeting. It does not come and go, it does not weaken when questioned. If anything, it becomes quieter and more settled the longer it is acknowledged. You may notice that when this kind of knowing appears, there is an absence of fear around it, not because the decision is comfortable, but because it is clear. Fear may still exist around the consequences, the timing, or the unknowns, but it does not touch the core of the knowing itself. The clarity remains intact beneath it. This is an important distinction. Inner knowing does not promise ease, does not promise success, does not promise certainty about outcomes. What it offers is alignment, a sense that the direction itself is correct, even if the path forward is not yet visible. That is why these moments often arrive without instruction. They do not tell you how everything will unfold. They do not map the future. They simply establish direction. And once direction is set, the need for excessive deliberation falls away. Inner knowing also has no interest in being justified. You may notice that when you try to explain it to others, language feels insufficient. The words feel thinner than the experience itself. You may struggle to articulate why something feels right, not because the knowing is weak, but because it exists beyond argument. This can be uncomfortable in a world that values explanation. We are taught to defend our choices, to present reasons, to make our decisions legible to others. Inner knowing does not operate in that currency. It does not require agreement. It does not seek validation. When you honor it, there is a subtle strengthening that occurs. Not an increase in confidence, but a decrease in internal noise. The mind becomes less insistent. The urge to second-guess softens. You stop circling the same question because the answer has already settled. When you ignore it, something else happens. The knowing does not disappear. It remains present, quietly persistent. Over time, ignoring it creates a sense of dissonance. You may feel disconnected from yourself without knowing why. Decisions feel heavier, momentum slows, life feels slightly misaligned, even if everything looks fine on the surface. This is feedback. Inner knowing does not demand obedience. It simply reflects coherence or incoherence, depending on whether it is acknowledged. When you move with it, energy flows more cleanly. When you move against it, effort increases. This is why inner knowing is often associated with timing. It arrives when you are ready to hear it, not when you are ready to understand it. You may have sensed it long before you acted on it. You may have felt it weeks or months earlier, dismissed it, and then felt it return with the same quiet certainty. It does not escalate, it does not pressure you, it waits. There is a patience to inner knowing that the mind does not share. The mind wants resolution. It wants closure. It wants to move forward. Inner knowing is content to remain present until recognition occurs. It does not chase your attention. It trusts that you will return to it when you are ready. This is why these moments often feel like thresholds rather than choices. Something inside you has already crossed a line. The mind may still be standing on the other side, questioning, evaluating, delaying, but the deeper part of you has already moved. The decision has already taken shape. When the mind finally aligns with that movement, there is no sense of victory. There is a sense of alignment, a feeling that something has fallen into place rather than been forced into position. This is also why these decisions feel difficult to reverse. Once inner knowing has been acknowledged, pretending not to know becomes exhausting. You may still hesitate, you may still delay, but the internal reference point has shifted. You cannot unknow what you know. Over time, learning to recognize this quality of knowing changes your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust the moments of quiet clarity more than the moments of mental intensity. You begin to notice that the decisions that carry the most weight often arrive without effort. You begin to see that certainty does not always come from thinking harder. Inner knowing does not replace discernment. It does not remove responsibility. It does not absolve you from navigating consequences. What it does is provide a stable internal reference, a place to stand when external factors are uncertain. As you become more familiar with it, you may notice that it speaks less often than the mind, but when it does, it is precise. It does not comment on everything. It does not offer opinions on every situation. It emerges only when something is true enough to matter. And when it does not ask to be believed. It asks to be recognized. This is the nature of inner knowing. It is not mystical, it is not dramatic, it is deeply ordinary and profoundly reliable. It has been with you far longer than any strategy, any plan, any explanation you have constructed. Understanding this is not about learning a new skill. It is about remembering a capacity you already possess, one that has guided you through more of your life than you may realize. And once you begin to recognize it clearly, you start to see why some decisions never felt like choices at all. They were moments of recognition, moments when something true made itself known. And this understanding opens the door to something deeper still. There is a moment that arrives quietly, often without ceremony, when resistance stops working. You may still hesitate, you may still delay, but the effort it takes to resist begins to outweigh the effort it takes to move forward. This is the moment most people misinterpret. They assume resistance means uncertainty. They assume hesitation means the decision is not ready. But in reality, this kind of resistance appears after something has already been decided internally. It is not a signal to wait, it is a signal that the internal alignment has already shifted. Here is the point most people never see clearly. Resistance does not always mean no. Sometimes it means too late to go back. When a decision feels impossible to resist, it is because the part of you that determines direction has already moved ahead of the part of you that seeks comfort and explanation. The mind may still be trying to negotiate, but the deeper orientation has changed. Like, you are no longer standing at the beginning of a choice, you are standing behind it, looking back. This is why forcing yourself to choose otherwise feels draining, not emotionally dramatic, just energetically expensive. And you may notice a dull heaviness when you imagine staying where you are, a sense of stagnation, not fear. The resistance is not protecting you. It is reacting to being out of alignment with what has already shifted. This is the first real turning point in understanding these decisions. The struggle is not between two equal options. The struggle is between movement and delay. One direction already carries momentum, the other requires effort to maintain. Once you see this, the experience changes completely. You stop asking why you cannot make yourself want the old option again. You stop questioning why your motivation has disappeared. You stop interpreting the lack of enthusiasm as confusion. Instead, you recognize it as a signal that the internal orientation has already changed. This is the moment of recognition that most people miss, and it costs them years. They keep trying to revive a version of themselves that no longer exists. They try to talk themselves back into paths that once made sense. They search for reasons to stay attached to identities, roles, or directions that no longer hold weight internally. And the more they try, the heavier everything feels. It is the feeling of pushing against a direction that is no longer dominant inside you. This is why these decisions often feel irreversible once they are acknowledged, not because the external situation has changed, but because you have. The internal reference point has shifted. The old arguments no longer land. The old motivations no longer work. You may still go through the motions, you may still attempt to delay, but something fundamental has moved and the system knows it. This is the part that creates the sense of inevitability. A sense of direction. Direction does not announce itself loudly. It does not demand action, it simply reorders what feels possible. Certain options lose their charge, others gain quiet gravity. You are not being pushed forward, you are being pulled out of alignment with what no longer fits. Here is the clearest way to recognize this moment. When resistance is present, but the thought of staying feels heavier than the thought of moving, the decision has already been made. The resistance is not telling you to stop. It is revealing that you are already past the point of return. This is why clarity often arrives after prolonged hesitation. Not because you finally figured it out, but because the cost of delaying became more obvious than the cost of moving forward. The internal balance tipped, and once it did not tip back. At this stage, forcing yourself to choose differently feels like self-betrayal. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, persistent way. You feel slightly disconnected from yourself when you imagine ignoring what you know. You feel less present, less coherent, less aligned. Your system prefers coherence. When coherence is restored, energy stabilizes. When coherence is violated, effort increases. That is why resistance feels unsustainable once alignment has shifted. This is also why these decisions do not feel heroic. They do not come with a surge of confidence or certainty about outcomes. They come with resignation in the best sense of the word, a surrender to what is already true. When people say, "I had no choice," what they often mean is, "I could no longer pretend otherwise." And that is an important distinction. You always have options, but once internal direction has shifted, only one option remains coherent. The others may still exist in theory, but they no longer exist in truth. This is the stage where many people panic. They mistake inevitability for loss of control. They try to reclaim certainty by overthinking, seeking reassurance, or delaying action. But none of that restores the old orientation. It only prolongs the discomfort of misalignment. The relief comes not from understanding everything, but from acknowledging what has already moved. When you finally stop resisting, there is no fireworks, there is steadiness, a sense of internal alignment returning. The friction fades, not because the path is easy, but because you are no longer fighting yourself. This is why some decisions do not feel like choices, they feel like crossings, like moments where something inside you has already stepped forward and the rest of you is simply catching up. And once you recognize that, the question changes again. It is no longer about whether you should move forward, but about what part of you has already moved ahead. There is a quiet misunderstanding at the center of how most people think about choice. We imagine it as a moment of selection, a point where multiple paths are equally available and we simply decide which one to take. But the decisions that do not feel like choices do not arise from that place. They arrive after something more fundamental has already happened. By the time these moments appear, the selection has already occurred at a deeper level. What remains is not choice, but acknowledgement. And this is the realization that changes everything. Some decisions don't feel like choices because they are not moments of choosing. They are moments of confirmation. The direction was set before the mind entered the conversation. What you experience as certainty is not confidence about the future. It is coherence with the present. This is why these decisions feel settled rather than exciting. There is no sense of risk or reward driving them. There is simply the feeling that something is already aligned, already positioned, already true. The mind may still want to understand how or why, but the core has stopped negotiating. When this happens, it can feel disorienting. We are conditioned to associate meaningful decisions with struggle, with tension, with weighing consequences. So when clarity arrives without effort, it can feel suspicious, as if something has been skipped, as if certainty should require more work than this. But nothing has been skipped. Something has been completed. What actually ends in these moments is internal contradiction. The back and forth between what you know and what you are trying to convince yourself of dissolves. The internal argument stops because there is nothing left to argue with. One signal has become dominant. This is why these decisions feel irreversible once they are recognized, not because circumstances have locked you in, but because your internal orientation has changed. You are no longer facing the same direction. Trying to return to the old position feels unnatural because it is no longer where you are standing. This is the point where many people become afraid. They interpret inevitability as loss of freedom. They worry that something has taken control away from them. But what is actually happening is the opposite. You are no longer fragmented. You are no longer split between competing truths. Choice does not disappear here. It refines. You still have agency. You still have responsibility. What changes is what feels viable. Some options fall away not because they are forbidden, but because they no longer align with who you are becoming. They lose energy, they lose relevance, they stop pulling at you. When a decision becomes a confirmation, it means your inner signals are no longer contradicting each other. Thought, feeling, and orientation are pointing in the same direction. The sense of inevitability comes from that unity, not from external forces. This is why these moments often feel deeply personal but difficult to explain. From the outside, nothing may look different. From the inside, everything has reorganized. You are not choosing a new path. You are recognizing that you have already stepped onto it. And once that recognition occurs, pretending otherwise becomes exhausting. You may still hesitate. You may still delay, but the hesitation has changed its meaning. It is no longer uncertainty. It is adjustment. The mind is recalibrating to a reality that the deeper part of you has already accepted. This is the moment people describe when they say, "I didn't really have a choice." What they mean is not that they were forced. What they mean is that the truth became undeniable. The cost of resisting became higher than the cost of moving forward. That is the actual threshold. Before this point, deliberation serves a purpose. After it, deliberation creates friction. The function of thought shifts from deciding to integrating. The role of the mind is no longer to choose, but to support what has already been recognized. This is the moment when clarity stops asking questions and starts asking for alignment. And this is why these decisions feel so different from ordinary ones. They do not ask, "What do I want?" They ask, "What is already true?" They do not emerge from preference. They emerge from recognition. Once you understand this distinction, the feeling of inevitability loses its mystery. It is no longer something happening to you. It is something happening within you, a signal stabilizing, an identity consolidating, a direction locking in. And this is the point most people reach only after years of resistance. But when it arrives cleanly, quietly, without ceremony. And once it does, there is no real way back to not knowing. This is where choice gives way to confirmation. And this is where the next shift begins. When you begin living from recognition instead of deliberation, something subtle but profound changes in how you move through life. Life does not suddenly become simple, but it becomes clearer. You notice that many of the choices that once felt complicated were never actually unclear. They were unresolved because you kept trying to override what you already knew. When you stop doing that, momentum returns naturally, not as urgency, but as direction. Living from recognition does not mean acting immediately on every inner signal. It means honoring the difference between uncertainty and clarity. You begin to sense when something has already settled within you and when something is still forming. This discernment changes your relationship with timing. You stop forcing action prematurely and you stop delaying action unnecessarily. One of the first shifts you may notice is how your body responds to decisions. There is less tension, less bracing, less internal push. When you move in a direction that has already been recognized as true, your nervous system cooperates. Movement feels cleaner, effort becomes more efficient. You are no longer spending energy resisting yourself. This changes how you relate to opportunities. You stop chasing what looks impressive or externally validating and start responding to what feels internally aligned. This does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You say yes less often, but when you do, it carries weight. You say no without over-explaining because the decision does not require defense. You may notice that your language changes. You stop justifying your choices excessively. You stop rehearsing explanations in advance, not because you are dismissive of others, but because you are no longer seeking permission for what you already know. Your confidence becomes quieter, less performative, more grounded. Living from recognition also changes how you experience effort. You still work, you still show up, you still navigate challenges, but the work feels directed rather than scattered. You are no longer expending energy trying to convince yourself to want something. You are investing energy in what already holds meaning for you. This has a compounding effect over time. The more you honor recognized decisions, the easier it becomes to trust yourself. Not blindly, but relationally. You begin to see a pattern in your own life. The moments when you listened moved you forward. The moments when you resisted kept you circling. This observation builds trust not through belief but through experience. You also become less reactive to doubt. Doubt may still appear, but it no longer destabilizes you in the same way. You recognize it as part of the adjustment process, not as a signal to abandon direction. You stop mistaking discomfort for misalignment. You learn to distinguish between growth discomfort and internal contradiction. Living from recognition does not eliminate fear, it contextualizes it. Fear becomes information rather than instruction. You feel it without allowing it to redirect you. This alone changes how you navigate uncertainty. You are no longer waiting for fear to disappear before moving forward. You are moving forward because clarity is present, even if fear remains. This way of living also reshapes relationships. You stop trying to fit into spaces that require you to override yourself. You become less available for dynamics that depend on your self-doubt. You attract fewer situations that drain you and more that meet you where you are. Not because you are trying to attract anything, but because coherence filters what you engage with. You may notice that your pace changes. You move neither faster nor slower. You move more accurately. You take fewer detours. You spend less time undoing choices that were never aligned in the first place. Over time, this creates a sense of continuity. Your life begins to feel less fragmented, less reactive, more intentional without being forced. Living from recognition also changes how you interpret stillness. Pauses no longer feel like stagnation. They feel like integration. You trust that movement will resume when recognition occurs. You stop filling silence with unnecessary action. You allow clarity to arrive on its own terms. This does not make you rigid. It makes you responsive. You remain open, but not undecided. You listen deeply, but you do not abandon yourself in the process. You recognize that not every decision requires urgency, and not every delay requires justification. Over time, you begin to experience a deeper sense of self-respect, not as pride, but as alignment. You are no longer splitting your energy between what you know and what you pretend not to know. That internal integrity becomes palpable. You feel more present in your own life. This is what living from recognition actually looks like. It is not dramatic. It is not mystical. It is deeply practical in a quiet way. It simplifies without reducing. It clarifies without narrowing. And once you experience this way of moving through the world, it becomes difficult to return to the old way. Not because it was wrong, but because it was inefficient. You were spending energy managing internal conflict instead of directing your life. Living from recognition does not guarantee ease, but it restores coherence. And coherence, over time, changes everything. By now, something has settled, not as a conclusion, but as a recognition. The question that brought you here no longer feels urgent in the same way, because urgency was never the point. What matters is not what you will do next, but how clearly you can feel where you already stand. Somewhere along the way, the noise softened. The need to explain, justify, or rehearse faded into the background. In its place is a quieter awareness. The sense that certain things no longer require your attention, while others have already claimed it. This is not clarity as an answer, it is clarity as orientation. You may notice that the idea of choice itself feels different now. Less like a crossroads and more like a continuation, less like standing still and more like realizing you are already in motion. The path did not suddenly appear, it was already beneath your feet. This is the return, not to where you started, but to yourself with fewer layers in the way. When you look back at the moments in your life that truly changed your direction, they likely share this same quality. They were not loud, they were not dramatic, they did not feel like victories. They felt inevitable in a way that only made sense afterward. You did not feel proud of choosing correctly. You felt relieved that you finally stopped resisting. That relief is not passive. It is the feeling of internal coherence restoring itself, of no longer needing to hold opposing truths at once, of allowing what is already true to take its place without argument. This is why these decisions leave such a lasting imprint. They are not events, they are acknowledgements, moments when you stopped asking for permission to know what you know, moments when you allow direction to reveal itself rather than trying to manufacture it. And once that happens, the way forward does not demand certainty, it asks for trust. Not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in your capacity to recognize truth when it appears. Trust in the part of you that has been guiding you quietly all along, even when you were not listening. Nothing external needs to change immediately for this to matter. The shift that has occurred is internal, and that is where all meaningful change begins. From this place, action becomes cleaner, timing becomes more intuitive, decisions carry less weight because they carry less resistance. You are not being asked to commit to anything new right now. You are being asked to notice what has already committed itself within you, to honor the decisions that no longer feel like choices because they have already aligned your direction. This is the threshold, not between old and new, but between noise and recognition. Before moving on, there is value in anchoring this moment, not to hold on to it, but to acknowledge it. Recognition strengthens when it is named. Alignment stabilizes when it is witnessed. If something in you has shifted while listening, if you can feel the difference between deliberation and knowing more clearly now, you may choose to mark that shift, not for anyone else, for yourself. Write this in the comments to anchor this recognition. I trust what I already know. And now, as this moment completes itself, notice how little effort it takes to remain here, how nothing needs to be added, how nothing needs to be resolved. Some decisions do not feel like choices because they were never meant to be debated. They were meant to be recognized, and once you recognize them, the rest unfolds in its own time.